name is Georgie and I am from Zoolab. Welcome to our bee resources package. Now you have probably joined today because you might have an interest in bees, and that bee interest might not be a healthy one. You might not like them. You might be watching this video to figure out ways to get rid of them or find out ways to stop them stinging you. You might not like them because they sting. You might not like them because they're black and yellow, and that's quite a shocking colour scheme. Who does that, right? And you might just not like them because they give you the heebie-jeebies. Maybe these are your 3 reasons for not liking bees. Well, you know, I'm with you on some of them. Bees, yeah, they can sting. And yeah, they might give you the heebie-jeebies. I'll tell you what, if we both maybe are not fans of bees, maybe we should have a little bit of a bee party. What do you think? I've made some pizza and chips. Look, I might tuck into for our party. Why don't you do the same? We can have a little party all about we're not fans of bees. We don't like bees. How about that? Now, I thought afterwards, one of my favourite things, you know, is honey. We could have some honey on pancakes or on toast. What do you think? Yeah? Well, I'm just going to have to get my ketchup ready for my pizza, because you can't have pizza without ketchup, right? Oh, but wait. It says pollinated by bees. Now, if we don't like bees, then we shouldn't really be having ketchup if bees pollinate ketchup. So we'll do without the ketchup. Now, here's my chip box. They're nice stringy chips. I really like the stringy chips. But guys, look. It says pollinated by bees. Better not eat the chips. We'll just stick to the pizza. That's okay. So go put your pizza on. But there's obviously tomato on my pizza and peppers. And I've got this bowl here. And look. It says pollinated by bees. So we can't eat our pizza. We can't have our chips. We can't have our ketchup. And you know our honey? For our pancakes or our toast or our ice cream? Well, honey is made by bees. It's made by bees. So guys, if we don't like bees, then we can't eat any of those things. And that means if there weren't any bees, if the bees disappeared tomorrow, we won't have any of those things. I'm starting to realise just how important bees actually are, really. You see, I'm here to tell you how much I love bees, and I'm hoping I can get you to love them too. You see, bees, guys, are so important to us. They give us fruits and vegetables, and without them, well, we wouldn't have any of those things. Fruits and veg are really important. Without them all as crops, we're not going to have stuff to eat. These are the things that we eat day to day. Look at all those things. So how does a bee give us these things? What is pollinating? What is that? Pretty flowers? Well, if a bee comes along and goes to one of these flowers and has a nice drink of some nectar, that's like a sugary solution. It's a bit like you having your favourite drink. It fills its belly with that lovely nectar, and then it picks up on its legs. It's got spikes on its legs, and it picks up some pollen from the flower too. Now, just having drink from one flower is not enough for our bee, so it needs to visit another flower. Sometimes they have to visit about 100 flowers just to get their belly full of nectar. So our bee might then go to the other flower here on the same plant, has a drink of nectar, picks up some pollen on its legs again. Because it had pollen off this flower and went to this flower, it's transferred pollen from one flower to the other. And then you know what happens? Our flower from our plant here produces its fruit or vegetables, whatever that may be. If this was the tomato flower and our bee visited both flowers and transferred the pollen, well, then it's going to produce lots of lovely tomatoes like these that can go into your ketchup, that can go on the top of your pizza. So bees, guys, they're really, really, really important to us. They pollinate plants and they give us all of these fruits and vegetables. So how many bee species do you think there are in the UK where we live? Now you can probably think of a couple. You can probably think of our honeybees, of course, and those chubbier, fluffier bees, the bumblebees. Can you think of any more? You might be able to think of a couple. But you know how many there are in total? There are 267 species of bees in the UK. What a lot of bees. 267. Now we just tend to think of our honeybee and our bumblebee. But you know, there's so many more. Firstly, there's lots of different sorts of bumblebee alone. Then you've got some bees that are what we call solitary bees. That means they tend to live more on their own. And you'll find them, mason bees is one you might have heard of. You'll find them living, for example, amongst the bricks in houses in the mortar. This is a mason bee. That's another type of bee. Okay. So, bumblebees versus honeybees. What's the difference? Well, honeybees live in huge, huge hives with thousands and thousands of honeybees. They tend to nest up in a tree in a great big hive, and they are quite aggressive in their nature. If you get near them, they can be very aggressive. Now, don't get me wrong, any bee will protect its hive, but honeybees, because there's so many of them, they can swarm and drive you away. So they're the ones that are much more aggressive. Bumblebees, well, there's less in their hive. There's about 200 to 300, sometimes not even that many. Now, bees, of course, all have a sting. They have a stinger, but it's only the females that have the stinger because it's from the part of their body where they lay their eggs from. So if you've got a male bumblebee or a male honeybee, it's not going to sting you because it doesn't have that part on its body. So our bumblebees are not as aggressive, they don't live in big hives, and they're really important. Because do you remember I was talking about the fruits and vegetables? Well, honeybees pollinate too, but bumblebees are the only type of bee that can pollinate tomatoes. And that's because they buzz pollinate. So they go into the centre of the flower, but the pollen is at the back of the flower and they have to buzz to shake it off. Our honeybee is too narrow, so it can't shake it off. Our bumblebee has its advantages from being fluffier and bigger. So bumblebees are the only bee that can pollinate tomatoes. So they're really, really important. Remember your ketchup and your pizza. Okay, so there are some two main differences between bumblebees and honeybees. There's also tree bees as well. So they will live in the bark of a tree, okay? That's just another sort. Maybe have a look at all the different bee species there are. Maybe you could go on a bee hunt. Have a look at our resources. Let's learn about the anatomy of a bee. So how the characteristics on its body are broken down. So let's have a look. Well, this is our Barnaby bee. He's got 2 antennae. They're for feeling and smelling. He's got wings, but he doesn't have 2. You might think he has 2 wings. He's got 4 wings. Bees have 4 wings. Flies have 2, but bees have 4. Now he's got a head, he's got a thorax, this middle part of his body, and he's got an abdomen here. So he's got 3 body parts, a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. His antennae and eyes, of course. Now it looks like he's got 2 eyes, doesn't it? Bees have 5 eyes. They've got 2 big main eyes and they've got 3 little dots on top called ocelli, and they tell the difference between light and dark. So in total, 5 eyes. Let's have a look at a bigger picture, shall we? Look at this. So that's those 2 big eyes. They're called compound eyes. They're covered in lots of lenses. And on the top, can you see the 3 ocelli? They tell the difference between light and dark. Wow, look at that. Now let's think about our actual hive and what the hive is like inside. Well, out of all of those bees, you've got one who is bigger, and she does the egg laying. She is called the queen. So she's bigger, she lays all the eggs. None of the other females will lay eggs. It's only the queen that does that. We're going to take a step into a bumblebee hive. Okay, so let's see if we can spot our queen. Well, there's quite a few large bees crawling across. Remember, we've got the camera right inside the hive, so they all look pretty big. But over to our left, just to the edge of the screen, there she is, our big queen. Now, she's much bigger than the others, even those large drones. You can see the back end of her body pulsating, moving up and down. That's where she's been laying her eggs. She also will go around and check some of the cells and make sure that they're as they should be, and make sure that the larvae are being fed, and the build as well. But her main job is to make sure these eggs are being laid to increase the hive in number as much as possible. So you can see just with all those drones next to her, although they are large, she is that much bigger again. Look at that. Now it's an ideal opportunity now to also see some of these larvae. Look at the bottom of the screen. You can see some of them. You can actually see some movement in those, remember those donut shaped cells that have the larvae inside? You can see the larvae moving sometimes with their legs. So that's what the nurse will be doing. The nurses will be feeding those. There's our queen in the middle having a bit of a wash then. Brushing her legs over her head, which is right in the middle of the screen now, guys. And there's our queen bee. Look at that, she's moving off. We'll follow her. There we go. Very, very busy. Then you've got all the other bees. Well, all the boys, they're called drones. And it's their job to grow up and leave the hive, and off they go to find a queen. So they leave the hive and they're gone. Now all our females that are left in the hive, well, they're called the workers. They do all of the work, all the females. But it's not just a case that they're all workers and they all do different things. Well, they all do different things, but they've all got separate job roles. Should we go through those job roles of our female workers? First of all, the younger, smaller female bees, their job is to be a nurse. You see, bumblebees, well, and bees in general, they have a life cycle. So the queen lays her egg, that turns into a larvae, a little grub. Then that goes into a pupae, and that turns into a bee. So it's an egg, a larvae, a pupae, and then a bumblebee. Okay. So our nurse, our younger bumblebees, they feed the larvae food to help them grow. So that's their job when they're young. They become a nurse bee. So then what else have we got? Well, we've got builder bees. They build up the hive. They build up all the wax cells in the hive. That's their job. That's a very important job too, because those wax cells hold nectar, that sugary solution. You see, do you remember our bumblebee visited a flower, drank some nectar and picked up some pollen? When it's got a belly full of nectar, it flies back to the hive, goes to one of these cells the builders have made, and then it regurgitates it. It's a bit like being sick. And in a honeybee hive, that stuff they've regurgitated is what makes your honey, guys. Yeah, it's a bit like bee sick, but it's okay to eat, don't worry. And it's very nice, and it's really good for you too. So we've got our nurse bee, we've got our builder bee, and our builder bee, when it makes those wax cells, it uses the pollen to help it do that. It has the pollen on its legs and it brings it to its mouth and mixes it with its saliva and uses it and turns it a bit like plasticine into these cells. Let's see what other job roles there are, shall we? Well, we've got the temperature controller. You see, the temperature in a hive should always stay around sort of 25 to 30-ish degrees. If it starts to drop too cool, well then our temperature controller bees, they pump the muscles in their chest and they shiver, a bit like you and I shiver when it's cold, and it creates heat to make that hive the right temperature. They'll also build up, make the builder bees build up around the outside of the hive more wax to cover it to keep the heat in. So we've got a temperature controller, a nurse, a builder. Let's see what else we've got. So we've got an undertaker. I don't know if you know the job of an undertaker, but it is the job of an undertaker to carry any dead larvae, any dead bees that have unfortunately happened in the hive, to carry them away from the hive and keep it safe in the hive. You don't want dead bodies lying in the hive because that will spread disease. So it's their job to take them away from the centre of the hive. So they've got an important role too. Then you've got the cleaner bee. It's the cleaner bee's job to clean up all the mess. Anything left over in the hive, well, this one goes around cleaning up and making sure everything is spick and span and how the queen would like it. So that's the cleaner bee. Then we've got the guard bee. This is a very, very important job. You see, if anything is trying to get into the hive, well, you need some protection to protect all of your hive. So the guard bees are the ones that stand near the entrance and they guard. And if something is trying to get in the hive, they will head towards whatever is attacking the hive and buzz and try and sting them and keep them away. Very important job. And lastly, of course, your forager. So your forager worker bees are the ones that leave the hive, go and collect the nectar and the pollen. And you know, when our female is first becomes a bee from being a larvae, it will be a nurse first of all. That's the first job, to feed the larvae. And then they go through all the job roles. And the job role that's at the top is the forager, because that's your experienced bee that is needed to do the foraging for the hive. It goes off, collects nectar and pollen, several plants, several flowers, and then flies back to the hive. It's an important job because they need to navigate and find their way around to the flowers and back to the hive and try and stay safe all at the same time. So it's a really, really important job. Okay, guys, so our bees are pretty impressive because not only do they have that anatomy of the head, the thorax, the abdomen, the feelers, the antennae, they work together as a team. They've got a sting in their tail. But you know, some bees have really long tongues. If a bee goes to a foxglove, now a foxglove has, the centre of the flower is very long, so the bee goes in and to reach the nectar, which is right down the bottom, it has to unravel its long tongue, it's called a proboscis, to get to that nectar. So some bees have long tongues to allow them to do that. Now, let's test your knowledge. We're going to do a bee quiz. bee quiz now. So let's see how much you have learnt. Okay, so our first question then is, how many body parts does a bee have? Does it have A, 2, B, 3, or C, 4? How many body parts do you think? Well, I'll tell you, the answer is 3. Remember, a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. 3 body parts. Now, our next question is, let's have a look. How many times a second does a bee flap its wings? Ooh, now, let's see if you can guess, because we've not talked about this one. How many times does a bee flap its wings in a second? Is it A, 100? Is it B, 200? Is it C, 300? What do you think? How many times does a bee flap its wings in a second? Well, it is 200. It flaps its wings 200 times. Wow, okay. So, how many bee species are there in the UK? How many bee species are there in the UK? Is it A, 267? Is it B, 293? Or is it C, 312? Who had good listening? How many bee species in the UK? There are 267. So A is the correct answer to that. So, in the bee life cycle, what is the next stage after the egg? Is it larvae? Is it pupae? Is it bee? Is it larvae? Is it pupae? Is it bee? The next stage in the life cycle after the egg is the larvae. So remember, our nurse bees feed our larvae. Okay, good job. I hope you're doing well with this, guys. And if a bee approaches a foxglove, how are pollen and nectar collected? A, long tongues. B, long legs. Or C, long antennae. What do you think? Long legs, long tongues, or long antennae? Well, it's long tongues. That's how they collect it from the centre of a foxglove, from their long tongues, using that. Now, let's go back to our picture of our bumblebee. Now, we looked at those big eyes, remember, and the ocelli on top, so they have 5 eyes. Well, our bee doesn't see the world how you see the world, guys. Our bee sees in a completely different colour formation to you, okay? It sees in what we call the ultraviolet spectrum. It sees colours that you don't even see. It sees a yellow flower will be lit up like a runway, like a fun fair, and it entices the bee to go towards it to pick up some nectar and pollinate that flower. So very, very important stuff. It doesn't see how you see. It sees in what we call the ultraviolet spectrum. So what do we call the special name for the spectrum that bees see in? You've got ultraviolet, red, or multicoloured. It is the ultraviolet spectrum. Okay. Now, guys, out of all of those bees, there are lots of different species, 267, as we've learnt. But why are we learning about bees? Why have we put these resources together to talk to you about bees and for you to try and get you to protect them? Well, the problem is, guys, is that bees are declining in number. What that means is there's not as many as there used to be many years ago. Now, we've just learnt how important they are because they give us all these fruits and vegetables. And without them, well, we wouldn't have those things. So why are they declining? Well, here's some of the reasons. There's too much pollution in the world from factories and cars, and that's causing big problems for bees. There's pesticides, so putting pesticides out on fields and crops where bees visit the flowers, and that's really affecting the bees. Habitat loss, that means cutting down of habitat areas where bees normally go, like wildflower meadows and things, to build houses. And then, of course, climate change. Because of this, it's causing the temperature to increase, and it's causing the bees problems because it's temperatures that they're just not used to. And it's meaning that they're coming out at times they wouldn't normally come out, and then it might be very cold the next day, and it's causing them problems. So what can you do to help? Well, we've already mentioned about mums and dads don't mow your lawn. Girls and boys, you can help mum and dad plant some special flowers in your garden that attract the bees. You could make a bee hotel. That would be a fun thing to do. That's just some of the things that you can do to help our bees. We're going to take a step into a bumblebee hive. And here we are inside the hive. Just wow, look at all of that activity going on. And if you listen, you can hear all that buzzing, all this communication with each other. Moving around in the hive, everybody is doing something very, very important. Now, let's have a look at all these different things that are in the hive. Now, you can see all of these wax cells. So these wax cells are made from pollen and saliva. The bees use their jaws and their back legs to turn it a bit like plasticine into these cells, and all these cells have an important job. Now at the top of the screen you can see some of them are full of liquid. Now that liquid is of course the nectar they have collected from the flowers and brought it back to the hive. That's got so much sugar in it, gives the bees so much energy, and that's where they store it. You can see the liquid inside those cells, really, really important source of sugar. Now let's have a look at the other cells. Now over to the left of the screen, can you see some yellow almost ball-like shapes in the bottom left of the screen? There's a few bees walking over them at the moment. There's some also in the middle, and they're completely closed over and they're yellow. Well, those are the eggs that have been laid by the queen, of course, inside those cells, and it's closed over and it's waiting for that egg to change into larvae. Now let's move away from those yellow egg cells across to the ones that look a bit like donuts. The ones just over to the right, you'll see two that have holes in the middle of them, and the one over to the right, you can see something moving inside. Well, the larvae has hatched out of the egg, and the reason that the holes are made in the top is for the larvae to breathe, but also for the nursing bees, the younger worker bees, the nurses. They will go and feed the larvae through that hole. So this is what's going on with those two that you can see right there. It's where the access point for the female to feed the larvae. Look at that. So much going on. So much going on. What a busy hive. Okay, so let's see if we can spot our queen. Well, there's quite a few large bees crawling across. Remember, we've got the camera right inside the hive, so they all look pretty big. But over to our left, just to the edge of the screen, there she is, our big queen. Now, she's much bigger than the others, even those large drones. You can see the back end of her body pulsating, moving up and down. That's where she's been laying her eggs. She also will go around and check some of the cells and make sure that they're as they should be, and make sure that the larvae are being fed, and the build as well. But her main job is to make sure these eggs are being laid to increase the hive in number as much as possible. So you can see just with all those drones next to her, although they are large, she is that much bigger again. Look at that. Now it's an ideal opportunity now to also see some of these larvae. Look at the bottom of the screen. You can see some of them. You can actually see some movement in those, remember those donut shaped cells that have the larvae inside? You can see the larvae moving sometimes with their legs. So that's what the nurse will be doing. The nurses will be feeding those. There's our queen in the middle having a bit of a wash then. Brushing her legs over her head, which is right in the middle of the screen now, guys. And there's our queen bee. Look at that, she's moving off. We'll follow her. There we go. Very, very busy. Now, in a honeybee hive, the queen has even more control. She will control so much that when the queen actually dies, the whole hive almost breaks down because it doesn't know what to do with regards to who's in control. It's not quite so regimental in a bumblebee hive, but she does still take a lot of sort of responsibility and check things. See, she's actually looking at that cell now with the larvae in. She could well be just helping out. But you can definitely see the difference in size with her there, can't you? Wow. Okay guys, I hope you've enjoyed seeing all our bee videos and seeing inside the hive. What a great opportunity. But also the bee resources, don't forget, if there's anything that you can do to help our bees, well, that will be amazing. That will be amazing. We'd love to be able to have encouraged you to not mow your lawn or build a bee hotel. All of these things will help our bees, and we've learnt just how important they are to us. So I hope you'll be encouraged to go and help our bees. Thanks again for watching our bee resources and our videos, and we will see you very soon at Zoolab. Thank you. Hi, we're Zoolab, the UK's #1 for ethical hands-on animal encounters.